They fired me for breaking a policy I had never even seen, a piece of paper I never signed, a training session I never attended. They thought I would just pack my things and disappear quietly. And, to be fair, I did. I left very quietly, very professionally. But what they didn't count on was that my silence wasn't submission. It was the beginning of their downfall. They took my job for a fabricated reason. So I took their license to operate, completely by the book. This story isn't about loud, dramatic revenge. It's about the price of carelessness and how one quiet employee can bring a whole operation to its knees with a single, well-placed complaint. I used to work at a shop that sold everything from snacks to high-end liquor. It wasn't a bad job. It paid the bills. I'm the kind of person who keeps her head down, gets her work done, and goes home. I don't cause drama. I don't get involved in break room gossip. I'm just there to work. That simplicity was all I wanted. But the environment was anything but simple. From the first week, I noticed a kind of organized chaos, an unprofessionalism that seeped into every corner of the store. Everything felt like it was held together with duct tape and wishful thinking. And it was that sloppiness that ultimately became my weapon. They never expected that the quiet girl at the cash register was the one observing and remembering everything. The management's sloppiness wasn't just a feeling. It was a daily reality. Training was a word that didn't exist in their vocabulary. When I started, my manager, a man named Mark, just clapped me on the shoulder and said, "You'll pick it up. Just watch what the others do." There was no employee handbook, no checklist, no formal documentation of any kind. Everything was tribal knowledge. "Oh, don't forget to wipe down the top shelf on Tuesdays," a coworker might say offhandedly. "Mark hates it when it gets dusty." That's how we learned, through whispers and warnings about what annoyed the manager. The real problem was the liquor section. Selling alcohol isn't like selling a bag of chips. It comes with serious legal responsibilities. You have to check IDs. You have to know how to refuse service to intoxicated customers. You have to understand local ordinances. When I asked Mark about formal training on alcohol laws, he just scoffed. "Just look at their driver's license," he said. "If they look young, card 'em. It's easy." But it wasn't easy. There are sophisticated fake IDs. There are complex legal situations that a simple "just look at it" doesn't cover. I found myself going online on my own time, reading up on the regulations, trying to educate myself. I did it not for the company, but for my own protection. I didn't want to get caught in a legal mess because of someone else's laziness. I saw my coworkers get into tricky situations multiple times. One time, a kid who looked 17 at best walked in and tried to buy a case of beer. My coworker, a young woman who had only been there a few days, hesitated. She looked at me, her eyes pleading for help. I walked over and politely asked the kid for his ID. He mumbled something and walked out. Later, my coworker whispered to me, "Thank you. I wasn't sure what to do." Mark never made it clear. It was moments like that, piling one on top of the other. A cloud of uncertainty hung over the store. We were all working in a legal minefield without a map or a metal detector.
Management was completely indifferent. As long as money was coming in, they were blind to the risks. They treated legal compliance as an annoying chore rather than a mandatory requirement. They never held staff meetings to update us on new rules. They never ran checks to see if we actually understood what we were doing. They just assumed everything would be fine. The arrogance was stunning. They were running a business involving a highly regulated product as if they were running a lemonade stand. I started taking notes, not with any malicious intent, but purely for self-preservation. I documented the dates I asked for training. I noted the instances where a lack of guidance caused confusion. I had a small notebook, a quiet record of their systemic sloppiness. At the time, I thought of it as my own personal insurance policy. I had no idea it would soon become my most important piece of evidence.
The day it all fell apart started like any other. I clocked in on time, put on my uniform, and started my shift. Nothing was out of the ordinary. Around midday, when the store was moderately busy, Mark emerged from his office. "Anna, can I see you in my office for a minute?" he asked, his tone flat and distant. A knot of dread formed in my stomach. What did I do? I mentally reviewed my transactions. Everything seemed fine. I walked into the small, stuffy office. Sitting across from Mark was a woman I'd never seen before, someone from upper management. She had a stern look on her face, her eyes dissecting me as if I were a criminal. "Hello, Anna," Mark began, avoiding my gaze. "This is Mrs. Davis from corporate." I nodded a polite hello. No one offered me a seat. The air was thick with tension. "Anna," Mrs. Davis said, her voice sharp, "we have reason to believe you have committed a serious breach of company policy." My heart started to pound. A breach? Me? I was the most careful person there. Specifically, she continued, you failed to follow the proper ID checking procedure when selling alcohol. I was stunned into silence. This was the one area where I was most confident, the one area I had to teach myself because of their negligence. "I don't understand," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "I am always extremely careful about checking IDs." Mark finally spoke, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "We had a secret shopper in last week, Anna. Our report states that you failed to follow the Challenge 25 protocol." Challenge 25 was a policy that required cashiers to card anyone who looked under the age of 25. It's an industry standard, but at our store it had never been formally mentioned, let alone trained. "I don't know what Challenge 25 is," I said plainly. "No one ever trained me on that policy. There was no manual, no meeting. The truth was laid bare for them to see." Mrs. Davis raised an eyebrow, a smug little smile playing on her lips. "Ignorance of policy is not an excuse, Anna. All employees are required to sign an acknowledgement of alcohol policy training upon being hired." And that's when I knew I was being set up. "Then," I said, my voice now holding a new edge of defiance, "please show me that acknowledgement. Show me my signature on a document that says I was trained on Challenge 25. The room fell silent. Mark began to awkwardly shuffle through a pile of papers on his desk, his face turning red. He knew it didn't exist. Mrs. Davis knew it. They had nothing. They were firing me over a rule they couldn't prove I had ever been told. Their silence was the loudest confession. "Since you can't provide that proof," I stated, my voice surprisingly firm, "I assume we're done here." Mrs. Davis seemed taken aback by my directness. "The decision has been made," she said flatly. "Your employment is terminated, effective immediately." The feeling of betrayal, of raw injustice, washed over me. But underneath that anger, a spark had been lit, a cold, hard resolve. They had made a colossal mistake. They had underestimated me. They expected tears, begging, but they got none. I just nodded. "Very well," I said. "I'll get my things." As I turned and walked out of that room, I didn't feel defeated. I felt empowered. They had just handed me everything I needed, an undeniable injustice. I walked out of that store with a small box of my personal belongings and a strange sense of calm. There were no tears, no angry phone calls. The rage and the sense of betrayal were still there, but they had been forged into something sharper, more focused, a plan. The moment I got home, I didn't go on social media to rant or call friends to complain. I opened my laptop and got to work. They had fired me for a process they didn't train me on. This wasn't just unethical, I suspected it was illegal. I spent that evening and the next few days researching. I read everything I could find on my state's liquor licensing laws. I learned about mandatory training requirements for staff, the importance of record keeping, and the penalties for non-compliant businesses. The more I read, the more I realized the gift their carelessness had given me. It turned out that a store being unable to provide proof of alcohol-related staff training was an extremely serious violation. It wasn't just an administrative error, it was grounds for license revocation. My little notebook, the one I had kept so diligently, was now my most valuable asset. In it were the dates, times, and details of my requests for training and their dismissals. There were specific examples of staff confusion. It was no longer a personal diary. It was an indictment. Armed with this information, I began to draft a letter. It wasn't an angry letter. It was professional, objective, and cold. I detailed my employment at the store. I described the unprofessional environment and the complete absence of any formal training regarding alcohol sales. I recounted my termination meeting in detail, highlighting management's failure to produce any proof that I had been trained on or even made aware of the policy I was accused of breaking. I included direct quotes from the state licensing laws, pointing out the exact statutes I believed the store had violated. Writing that letter was therapeutic. Every word I typed was a step toward reclaiming my power. They had tried to make me a victim, a scapegoat for their own incompetence. But with this letter, I was making myself an agent of accountability. I wasn't asking for pity or an apology. I was presenting an irrefutable case to an authority with the real power to make them answer for their actions. After proofreading the letter multiple times, ensuring every detail was accurate and stripped of emotion, I printed it. I gathered all my documentation, including copies of the notes from my notebook, into a large envelope. The next morning, I drove to the office of the State Liquor Control Board. As I walked into that stoic government building, I felt a sense of purpose. I wasn't Anna, the wrongly fired cashier, anymore. I was a citizen exercising my right to report a potential danger to the community. I submitted my complaint quietly and professionally, the same way I had left the store.
The clerk accepted my envelope with a solemn nod. As I walked out of that building and into the fresh air, I knew I had done the right thing. The ball was no longer in my court. It was rolling directly toward them.
The wait that followed was an exercise in patience. I started my job search, sending out resumes and going on interviews. Life had to move on. But every day I checked my email, hoping for an update. About 3 weeks later, it arrived, an official email from the Liquor Control Board. It informed me that they had received my complaint and had launched a formal investigation into my former employer. My heart beat a little faster. The wheels of justice were turning. I didn't have to wait long to see the results. One evening, scrolling through social media, I stumbled upon a post in a local community group. Someone had asked, "Does anyone know why Store X isn't selling alcohol anymore? I just went in and the whole liquor aisle is empty." Dozens of comments poured in. "I heard they lost their license." "Really? What happened?" "A friend who works there said they failed a major inspection." I sat there, staring at the screen, and a slow smile spread across my face. It wasn't a vicious, gleeful smile, but one of pure vindication. It had happened. Their sloppiness had finally caught up with them. They had lost their biggest moneymaker. A convenience store without liquor loses a massive chunk of its customer base. I could only imagine the panic in their corporate office, the finger-pointing as they realized that firing one quiet employee had cost them dearly. They tried to save a few dollars on training, and it ended up costing them tens, maybe hundreds of thousands in revenue. But my story wasn't over. With official confirmation that they had violated training regulations, the very reason they fired me, I had an ironclad case for wrongful termination. I contacted a lawyer who specialized in employment law. After hearing my story and reviewing my documents, my lawyer smiled. "This isn't going to be a fight, Anna," he said. "This is a knockout." We sent a demand letter to the company seeking compensation not just for lost wages, but for damages caused by the illegal firing. They tried to put up a fight at first, but when faced with the undeniable evidence of their own failure, confirmed by a state agency, they had nowhere to go. They settled. I never saw Mark or Mrs. Davis again. I didn't need to. My revenge wasn't a fiery confrontation. It was delivered through processes, forms, and a respect for the law. All the things they had dismissed. They tried to play a rigged game, not realizing I knew the rules better than they did. They fired me to make an example of me. And in the end, they became an example themselves. They thought I was just a quiet employee they could push around. They forgot that the quietest people are often the most observant. I didn't seek revenge. I sought accountability. And sometimes accountability is the most satisfying outcome of all. They taught me a valuable lesson. Never let an injustice go unchallenged, because sometimes the quietest voice, when backed by the truth, can make the loudest impact.